What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and I'm glad you decided to tune in for today's episode. If you're new here, I want you to know what this podcast is all about. This podcast is all about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, helping you in all aspects of your life, and helping you read significantly more into every statement that is directed your way. How am I doing today? What do you mean by that? What are you trying to say? You trying to say that I look like some sad person who drinks beer alone in his bathtub while listening to George Strait albums? That all my exes probably live in Texas and that's why I'm here in a different state? Is that what you're trying to say? Now, why do I get the feeling that I'm inspiring some future hidden camera prank channels? Hopefully not. Oh, by the way, today's episode is about nonviolent communication, if you didn't know. And in all seriousness, it's a book written by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, and it is super helpful in helping us get along with other people. And I want to start today's episode with a quote that I heard him say in one of his trainings. The goal of life is not to become perfect, but to become gradually less stupid, which is true and also probably the worst compliment you could ever give somebody. Like, hey, I noticed you're becoming gradually less stupid. Great job. Yeah. Probably polish that up before you deliver it to another human. Yeah, that's probably the move. But that is spot on. That's what I say oftentimes when I'm gauging my own life. I'm like, hey, am I becoming a better version of myself? Right? That's what this podcast is all about. And yeah, so we're going to hop into the episode. And we're going to talk today about receiving empathy, giving empathy, and also treating yourself right. Now, here's an unironic question that I have for you. Can you hear me now? And when I say that, this is actually based on something that Marshall says in his book. Hearing of the ears is one thing. Hearing of the understanding is another. And empathy occurs when we hear with understanding, not just with our ears, but with our hearts, right? And that sounds really corny, but whatever. We're just going to keep moving and talk about what empathy is and when it occurs. Marshall says, empathy occurs when we get rid of all preconceived ideas and judgments about someone. And this is a really difficult thing to do when you're interacting with someone you know, to have that blank slate mentality, especially when this person hasn't paid you back your money in 11 years. But that's how you have to see somebody. And yes, it's not easy, but this is how empathy truly occurs. And he says, when we're listening, oftentimes, instead of really listening, what we're doing is we're giving advice or we're giving them reassurance. And sometimes we explain our own position on a matter or our feelings. And you know what? I'm guilty of this myself, right? When a friend of mine goes through a breakup, I bust out the most recent census. I talk about the 1.4 million unmarried people over the age of 18 in the city. And if you stack those people up, you can go to the moon and back 3,000 times. And that's probably not something that my friends need to hear. So for those of you who I've done that to, this is my formal apology. And I promise not to do it again until the year 2030. All right, so instead of focusing on fixing a problem, what we got to do is fully focus on the other person's message. And you do also need to ask, hey, are you looking for solutions or are you looking to vent? That's one of the best questions to ask when someone's going through something and they need to talk. And if they want to just vent, if they just want to talk, what you got to do is take this as your marching orders. Don't just do something, stand there, which is a Buddhist saying, which means you don't have to do anything except to stand there and to listen. And there's no need for advising. There's no need for educating. You should never use the word actually when someone's dumping out their feelings. Like, that's not your job. Don't need to console them, sympathize with them. These are all good things at times, but your job, and you only have one job in that moment, is to listen for understanding. There's a story in the book about this rabbi whose son was dying, and people would come along and just start talking to him, and they would start doing this. They would start advising him. They would start consoling him, and they would do all of the things that I just mentioned. And it was like, man, throughout the years, as I've had people who have had dying relatives, and I said the very things that are being said to me at this moment, I didn't realize how much my helping actually hurt. And there's actually a book called When Helping Hurts, and that's real. Sometimes you have the best intentions and you do a lot of damage. I actually knew some guys back in high school. They were sitting inside one of those fried chicken places. I think it was like Popeyes or Mrs. Winter's. And this guy fell on the ground and started like convulsing. And so one of the guys actually started performing CPR on the guy. And it turned out that the person was actually having a seizure. And with all the best intentions in the world, not a lot of good was done that day. But on the bright side, they did get a free bucket of chicken for his efforts. Which, this is a totally true story. And the guy was fine eventually, so don't worry too much about it. But we oftentimes try to do good, and what we need to do is we need to just listen. And we need to listen beyond just their words. We need to listen for what people are needing versus what they are thinking. So if someone says, hey, this place is sketchy, maybe you can respond by saying, are you needing me to take you to a fight club that feels safe? Which, why would you want to go there? But anyways, that's your job. Listen, and as you listen, what you can do is you can start paraphrasing back to the speaker what has been said. And this is very simple stuff. Someone might say something like, hey, I want to beat that man up. And you could just say, so what I'm hearing from you is you're angry and you want to go fight that guy. This stuff is super simple, but it helps people to feel heard. And sometimes when people say something, you got to do some observing based on what they say. So let's say they say, what a total shame this contest was. What you could respond and say is, what I'm hearing is you are not happy with the results of this contest. And they'll be like, no, absolutely not. That person did not deserve to win. And then at that point, you could just start do some guesswork and say, hey, are you feeling disappointed because you feel like you should have been crowned Arthur County's hottest librarian? And then boom, we have gotten down to the matter of why they are upset. It's very simple stuff. So when people talk, you need to start paraphrasing back to them what they're saying, and eventually you'll get to the bottom of what they're saying and also what they're asking. They might say something like, I'm super scared about tomorrow. I hope things work out. And you say, yeah, I do too. And they say, yeah, I appreciate your support in anything you can do. And you can clarify their request and say, hey, are you asking me to provide false testimony under oath? And if they nod in response, you know at that moment you're being wiretapped. So when are you supposed to paraphrase? You do this when you're not clear on the message or when you feel like they want clarity that the message was received. And as they do this, when super intense emotional messages are being delivered, it's very, very important for you to speak in a way that doesn't even give the hint of sarcasm, doesn't give the hint of anything but deep empathy. Because if you do, that could create a lot of damage in the situation and the relationship. And as you're listening, don't rush into it and think that you're just going to hear them quickly, because people don't feel valued when they do that. There's oftentimes more to share. There's oftentimes more to explain, so on and so forth. And so allow them to continue to talk. And then just listen to them until they've fully exhausted their feelings on the matter. And what Marshall says is this brings a feeling of relief, not only to the speaker, but also to the listener. So I'm going to call this the filibuster of feelings. Let them let it all out. And if you do, a lot might come out. Here's an example. Maybe they're upset about their job loss and their financial security, but that turns out to just be the tip of the iceberg. They're also worried about breaking the news to their family. And they're also worried about putting up the open to work LinkedIn banner and the stigma that comes along with it. I recently saw one by someone super creative, And instead of saying open to work, it said, I'm not desperate, which is something you might want written on your name tag at your next speed dating event. Because communication is key. Now let's say you're in a situation where you don't have the energy to respond with empathy. These things happen. You might need to get some space. Maybe you walk to another room or even another county. But it's very important that you don't try to empathize when you don't have the energy to do this. And that's super important because you can't help people when you're not in the position to help them, right? Somebody may say something to you, which is a stimulus for your anger, and you're going to need a moment. For example, somebody might use a pejorative term towards you. They might call you a Swiftie. And, man, those are fighting words right there, right? But all jokes aside, if you feel hurt, if you need time, what you need to do is you need to get empathy either from yourself or from someone else, because that lizard brain will take over and you're not going to do any good in that moment. And that's why this stuff is so hard, because as you are dealing with people, you have to become zen and you might get triggered. And when you are triggered, your anger has to go somewhere. And that's something that we learned from Dr. Julie Smith. If your anger doesn't go somewhere, then it will come out on the person that you're speaking with. There's always a balance, and you got to strike that balance. Because when you do, that's when you can do a lot of good for the other person. Here's a quote from the book. When I've been listened to and heard, I can re-perceive the world in a new way and go on. And this is the power of listening, and this is the power of human connection. Think about this. Even in hostage situations, the people who are taking someone hostage have a need, right? And so even in very high stakes situations where people's lives are at risk, nonviolent communication can be helpful. There's actually a story in the book where this woman is working at a drug rehab center, and a guy comes in and he's angry and he's like, I need a room and I need a room right now. And she responded that they didn't have any rooms. And so he jumps on top of her, he pulls out a knife, he puts it to her throat. And what she does is she kicks in her nonviolent communication training that she just got. And she remembers something that Marshall said, which is don't put your butt in anyone's face. And what that means is don't say something like, but we don't have any rooms. She realized that if she said something like that, she would be dead. So instead she said, it sounds like you're really angry and want to be given a room. And he responds, yes, I want to be given a room. And then he starts talking about people disrespecting him. And then she just says, hey, it sounds like you are tired of being disrespected. And this continues to go on for 35 minutes. For 35 minutes with a knife at her throat. And eventually she talks the man down into putting the knife away. They find another room at another center. And she lives to tell the tale of this story. So, when you are listening to people, it's very important to realize that sometimes you can get them to actually stop talking about the same thing that happened and they told you the story a number of times and you're tired of hearing it. And you can actually stop them and be like, hey, sounds like you feel hurt and you are wishing that you were treated more fairly. That'll actually stop them in their tracks from telling that story again that you're so tired of hearing. And then you can kind of walk them through their feelings, and you can actually help them without rehashing old business, which never really helps anyone, right? When people start talking about things that have been done wrong to them, I mean, hearing it once is okay, but like belaboring over and over and over that same story, like that is not helpful, and it is exhausting to listen to, and I'm sure it's exhausting to tell as well. And in regards to interrupting people, he says it's better to interrupt people who are boring you to death than to pretend to listen. And this right here, yes, boom, that's what we all need to hear. Interrupt people, stop them from talking about boring stuff. Of course, do it with empathy, but save yourself a lot of heartache in the future with these conversations. And if they have a problem with it, tell them you're just practicing nonviolent communication. Boom, there it is. All right, let me do some summarizing about the past few minutes of what I talked about. Paraphrasing is a way to understand what's in their hearts, but there is no need to rush to let them just continue on. Each of us want to be heard out. There is power within our ears. So the best thing you can do is listen with great empathy. Alright, so that's that. We're going to move on to the section about treating yourself right. So you got to show compassion with yourself in the same way that you're being taught to show compassion for other people. And Marshall says, the same violent communication we use on others, we've actually been taught to use on ourselves. And the communication that we've been taught and programmed with is a program of self-hatred, and it's not about learning. So he says what you need to do is you need to see the inherent worthiness within you. And you need to realize that feelings and needs are not selfish or immature. I remember watching a YouTube video where this comedian was sharing about being on a first date with this woman. And he sneezed, and he tried to block his sneeze by plugging his nose, and then he soiled his pants. Soil with a capital S, a capital O, a capital I, and a capital L. And that L was a big old L because that's about as big of an L as you can take on a first date. So think about this. Was it selfish or immature for him to be feeling embarrassed? Or for him to be needing a new identity in a different state? No, absolutely not. Both of those things were spot on for that situation. Now, the cool part of the story is him and his date ended up getting married because she actually rescued him from that situation. And I think that statement, not all heroes wear capes, applies to this situation. Now, my question is, what do they say when people ask them about their first date? Maybe they just send them the YouTube clip, who knows? But having feelings and having needs is not immature or selfish. It's a part of being human. And one of the things that is also a part of being human that hopefully we can all break out of is feeling shame. Shame is a form of self-hatred, and shame is not productive. Marshall says that it blocks our ability to grow and also our ability to learn from our mistakes. And it also blocks everything good in the moment too. And honestly, when I feel shame, I start spiraling and I can't think, and it literally feels like someone is like in my face and they're just berating me. And when I feel shame, I'm just blocked. I'm blocked from having any good ideas in the moment. All I can experience in that moment is berating and hearing that I'm a bad person or I'm a screw up or whatever it is. And I'm inspired to practice nonviolent communication and self-love with myself in these moments because that is absolutely a gnarly feeling. And what Dr. Rosenberg says is when you make a mistake is just you making the best decision with your current knowledge. Like nobody makes a mistake wanting to make a mistake. Nobody screws up big wanting to screw up big. And so what he says is you need to empathize with yourself. And instead of saying, oh, I'm such an idiot, ask yourself what unmet need made you act that way. So here's an example. Maybe you push someone around because you felt unimportant because someone else was pushing you around. And once you realize what the unmet need is, you can come to the conclusion that you can meet that need for feeling important and for feeling valuable by making someone else smile instead of making someone else feel hurt. So always when you are feeling shame, forgive yourself, have some self-empathy, and ask yourself, what need were you trying to meet in that situation? And if you do that, if you empathize with your feelings and your needs, this will help you to problem solve, even if you have conflicting feelings. And there's a story from the book where this woman is feeling really unfulfilled because she's not doing anything with herself work-wise, but also she has these strong feelings about being a good mother. And even with these two conflicting feelings, she was able to strategize and come up with some good solutions to her problems by empathizing with her feelings and by implementing other aspects of nonviolent communication. All right, another thing that Marshall talks about in the book is he says, create an element of play in everything. And when he says play, he doesn't mean like everything has to be incredibly fun, but he also says that things do not have to be an absolute drag. He actually says drudgery is a form of violence because of the toll that it takes on us. So next time your boss asks you for some TPS reports, explain to him he's actually practicing violence. Now, for real though, what he does say is you need to change your verbiage from I have to do something to I choose to do something. And then when you choose to do something, you have to ask yourself, what is the need behind this choice? So he says, you can say, I choose to do X because I want Y. Here's an example. So you choose to give rides to the airport, not piggyback by the way, to your friends and family members because you want to spend time with people you care about. If you ask yourself this question every time, say, I choose to do this because I want this, right? It might actually get you to stop doing things that you realize you don't have to do and you don't want. And your motivation is all jacked up in the first place. So let's say I choose to go to the neighborhood meeting because I want the approval from my neighbors. Well, that's not a good motivation. And he says once you realize that your motivation isn't good, then what you realize is that you are not engaging in play. There's no fun in this. And that's the thing that you need to cut out. And you can do this with things you actually really dread, like work meetings, right? Yeah, maybe you don't want to go to a work meeting per se, but you choose to go to a work meeting. Why? Because you want to give input on the direction of your department, on the project that y'all are working on, and you want to get some stand-up comedy material from some of the stuff that's said in the meeting. Now what you got is an appealing reason why you go to your meeting. All right, let me wrap up that last part. All right, here we go. Check the words that I'm saying, nonviolent communication. What I'm just saying, you need to be relating with yourself. You need to tap in to your feelings and needs so you could just see what you need in the moment. And that's what I'm saying. You got to keep growing. You got to keep staying up with yourself and understand that shame is a monster. Shame is a blocker, all the good. So understand you might make mistakes, but it's a part of life. And that's what I'm saying. Pardon yourself. That's nice. That's what I'm saying. You got to just see the unmet needs that you're trying to grab. And that's what I'm saying. So you could just know what you got up in your life. A whole bunch of problems that you got to solve. Talk to y'all about this thing called element of play and do it all day. Basically what I'm saying is you got to ask yourself, why are you doing this? It is a choice. And that's what I'm saying. Speak out your voice to your own self so you could just see, should you keep going with the thing that you're doing? Is there a value that you got to keep on reinforcing right now? And that's what I'm saying. When I freestyle, I come off the top, talk about a whole bunch of things from that king, Marshall Rosenberg. You author these words, and that's what I come through, and that's what I serve. I spit off the top, and that's how it's going. Nonviolent communication, up in the flowing. All right, so that's it. End of episode 2 on nonviolent communication. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned a lot from it. For those of you who are new, don't forget to hit follow so you don't miss future episodes. And for those of you who have been listening, please rate and review the podcast. It helps a lot with getting the word out and getting guests, which I know I've been saying for the longest time I'm going to be having, and I will. I'm working on my podcast studio right now, and hopefully it'll be ready soon so I can bring you more of the greatest minds in the world. Shout out to my dude Siraj for making the instrumental for this podcast, and shout out to you for the awesome things that you're going to do with what you learned in today's episode. I'll be back next week with the final episode on this series, so keep an eye out for that. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. Hope you have a great day, a great week, and until next time, peace!